of President Reagan's words.
This is the CBS Evening News with John Roberts in Normandy, France, and Mika Brzezinski in New York.
And good evening from the American Cemetery in Normandy, where earlier on a clear and beautiful day, the presidents of France and the United States honored those who fought and died on the beaches and back roads of Europe 60 years ago. The D-Day ceremonies were shadowed today both by the death of former President Reagan and by the continuing differences between the two countries over the war in Iraq. But nothing could detract from the moving tribute to the nearly 10,000 U.S. soldiers buried on this hallowed ground. From the beaches at Arromanches, to the deadly cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, to the American Cemetery at Colville, this was a day to say thank you to the Americans who fought and died for the liberation of Europe.
All who are buried and named in this place are held in the loving memory of America. And we still look with pride on the men of D-Day, on those who served and went on.
The shadow of President Reagan's death hung heavily over this ceremony.
20 summers ago, and another American president came here to Normandy to pay tribute to the men of D-Day. He was a courageous man himself and a gallant leader in the cause of freedom.
Before more than 9,000 white grave markers and old warriors who came back for perhaps a final look, Presidents Bush and Chirac declared the alliance between the U.S. and France has and will stand the test of time.
America is our eternal ally.
And our great alliance of freedom is strong, and it is still needed today.
But even on this solemn day, where the unity that saved a continent 60 years ago was proudly on display, the deep divisions over current conflicts could not be covered over.
We must never forget that without a compass, without remaining faithful to the lessons of history, there can be no future.
It was a clear reference to Iraq, a war that has strained the historic transatlantic relationship. President Bush has urged world leaders to move past their differences. His subtle but unmistakable message today: America sacrificed to save France. Now France must help save America in Iraq.
America honors all the liberators who fought here in the noblest of causes. And America would do it again for our friends.
That's a message that President Bush will take back home with him when he travels to Sea Island, Georgia, hosting the world at the G8 summit. I'll be back later on in the broadcast with more from Normandy, but first, with the rest of today's news, we go to New York and Mika Brzezinski.
Good evening. The nation today remembered Ronald Wilson Reagan in ways both personal and public. Details of the first presidential state funeral in more than 3 decades were announced late this afternoon, and Jerry Bowen reports the Reagan family expressed thanks for the outpouring of sympathy.
President Reagan was remembered fondly today with flowers and flags at his presidential library and best wishes from one mourner after another.
I hope he's got a nice trip to heaven.
At the Santa Monica Funeral Home, where another makeshift memorial continues to grow, a family spokeswoman said these have been hard days for Mrs. Reagan.
I can tell you most certainly that while it is an extremely sad time for Mrs. Reagan, there's definitely a sense of relief that he is no longer suffering and that he has gone to a better place.
And at the Reagan's Bel Air home, where Mrs. Reagan was said to be taking some much-needed downtime, calls have been coming from many quarters.
Charlton Heston called her. Their old friends. Senator Ted Kennedy was one of the early people on the phone. Lucy and Lady Bird Johnson both placed the call together.
It was announced Mr. Reagan's body will be moved tomorrow morning to his presidential library in Simi Valley, where the public may come and pay its respects. Wednesday, the president's body will be flown to Washington, where it will lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda through Thursday. Friday, the funeral service at which President Bush will speak will be held at the National Cathedral, and that same day, Mr. Reagan will make his last journey home for burial at sunset on the grounds of his library. It is the first state funeral to be held in Washington since that of Lyndon B. Johnson in 1973. Pageantry, say observers, which defines a nation. A moment to remember and reflect on the life of the 40th president.
Moments like this temporarily bring us together. I mean, even in the case of Ronald Reagan, you will still have big arguments between liberals and conservatives about the meaning of his legacy. But for a brief time, I think both sides will reflect on positive things they can take out of it.
And that somber pageantry starts tomorrow when Mrs. Reagan comes to this funeral home to join the procession that starts her husband on the first leg of his final journey home. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Santa Monica.
President Reagan has rarely been seen since he announced a decade ago that he had Alzheimer's disease. Many will never forget the poignant words from his handwritten farewell to the nation. Today, as Randall Pinkston reports, the nation was saying farewell to him.
Across America, flags were lowered to honor the president. And even though the last decade of his life was spent mostly secluded, today he was not forgotten.
He was really a beloved president, and I think that people really genuinely liked him.
I think Ronald Reagan was a very good person. He had a lot of good personality.
This 1977 photo is one of the last of Mr. Reagan in public, in a Los Angeles park where he met Rostik Dennenberg and his grandfather, both immigrants from the former Soviet Union.
My grandfather and I congratulated him on all the beautiful things he did for the Soviet Union. He destroyed communism and made us be able to immigrate to the United States.
Dennenberg, now 18, said today he will never forget the president's response.
He had sincerity in his eyes, and he said thank you.
Even voters like Tom Dean, who didn't agree with Reagan's policies, give him credit for his ability to connect with people.
He did okay for our country, and they keep saying about he make everybody feel good about our country. I agree, he did.
There's probably no American community more proud than Dixon, Illinois, the town where Mr. Reagan grew up and worked as a lifeguard as a teenager.
When he went in after someone, he'd come back and cut a notch in the log. So he did that 77 times.
Only in America could a small-town hero grow up to become the most powerful man in the world. Randall Pinkston, CBS News, New York.
Since word of his death yesterday, tribute after tribute spoke to the late president's role as the great communicator. As Anthony Mason explains, it's not only what he said, but how and when he said it.
He was the oldest president ever to take office, but Ronald Reagan, about to turn 70, would sue the nation racked by self-doubt.
He came in at a poisonous time, or at least at the end of a poisonous decade.
Reagan biographer Edmund Morris says Americans had endured Vietnam, Watergate, the hostage crisis in Iran, an energy crisis at the gas pump.
And almost overnight, he transformed the country. It was mysterious, but suddenly we felt better about ourselves.
Let history say of us, these were golden years.
He did it with an actor's oratorical skill and a politician's keen instinct. While Nixon before him and Clinton after may have been shrewder politicians, quicker to tailor their policies to the needs of the moment,
Reagan never changed. His instincts were, he thought with his hips, to use an old American phrase.
He wasn't a traditional politician. He didn't spend his whole life wanting to be president, as a lot of people do.
Ed Rollins was political affairs advisor in the Reagan White House.
He was a very successful politician, but there haven't been a lot of others like him.
Well, he had this great ability to relate to people, and he always understood what the body politic was.
Your dreams, your hopes, your goals are going to be the dreams, the hopes, and the goals of this administration, so help me God.
And Americans embraced what his 1984 campaign ads described as a rebirth.
It's morning again in America.
The deficit doubled during the Reagan years. His second term was scarred by the Iran-Contra scandal. But he never lost that common touch.
That ability to believe in what he's doing is right and to go out and convince Americans that he was on the right track, and that sense of optimism, as I think a lot of people are missing today.
Ronald Reagan had an uncanny ability to make Americans feel good about themselves. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, how Ronald Reagan changed parties in more ways than one.
And later, from Normandy, the first French village liberated in the war, and the Americans who came back to call it home, as we continue to remember D-Day. The D-Day invasion hinged on taking this 6-mile stretch of sand along France's north coast. It is Omaha Beach. Some 2,400 U.S. soldiers were either killed or wounded here. Memories of that day are still vivid for 3 veterans who were among the first to storm these shores. And that's tonight's Sunday cover, the survivors of D-Day's deadliest beach.
Tell you the truth, I was scared, but I know I had a job to do.
Only thing you could look forward to was getting hurt or get killed. The beach was an armed camp. So it was a suicide wave.
The western edge of Omaha Beach was the objective of the 29th Infantry Division. A company of the 116th Regiment led the way. 46 of them were from the tiny farm town of Bedford, Virginia. Roy Stevens and his twin brother Ray, who'd never left each other's side, enlisted there for the $1-a-day pay.
The only thing separated us was June 6, 1944.
On that same misty morning, a rugged Jewish kid from New York was spoiling for a fight.
I drew a large Star of David on my field jacket.
Hal Baumgarten was just 19, with no plans for the future.
Because I made up my mind that I was probably going to die.
For Peter Rubino of New Jersey, it was not the Germans to be feared, it was the water of the English Channel.
Well, I couldn't swim, so I had 2 Texans. They were on my side, and they used to call me Dago. Dago, they said, put your arms around us and we'll walk it the way you could walk.
Roy Stevens extended a hand to his brother, but Ray wouldn't take it.
And after that, it dawned on me that he said, I'll never make it back.
It was 6:30 a.m.
When our ramp went down, it was a signal for every machine gun on that beach, and there was a lot of them, to open up on the exit to our little boat.
That's when I really prayed to my mother, because that machine gun was really raking.
Roy Stevens' landing craft sank before it reached the beach. He could barely see the battle as he struggled to keep from drowning.
I just couldn't believe it, that A Company could get butchered up like we were.
Of 170 men in A Company, only 15 made it past the seawall.
So one officer says, you know, we got 2 choices. Either we stay here and get killed, or we go up the hill and get killed.
With slaughter all around them, soldiers who'd never been in combat dug deep and found the courage to charge ahead.
I always tell people I fought till I ran out of blood.
Baumgarten had his face half ripped apart by shrapnel, but fought on. He was wounded twice more before collapsing in a ditch.
I'm laying with 6 dead soldiers. There's German planes going over. There's a German machine gunner down the road. I figured we lost. What would you have thought?
Roy Stevens, who'd been rescued and shipped back to England, finally made it to Omaha 4 days later. Boats and bodies were everywhere.
The first cross I came to was my twin brother was crossed. I couldn't believe that. I couldn't, it can't be him. You know, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
It was one of the greatest and most tragic moments in history, when everyday men became heroes and helped turn the tide of war.
There was no qualms about what we had to do. No, I'm not going to duck this, or I'm not going here, We had a job to do, and we did it to our ability.
It was that selfless determination and devotion to duty that we remember 60 years later, as we pause to consider what the world might have been like without it. We'll be right back. 1. For most of the U.S. soldiers who survived the assault here 60 years ago, Normandy was just a way station on a path that took them deeper into Europe and then back home to America. But as Tom Fenton tells us now, for a few of the men who landed here, fate took a very different course.
When American paratroopers dropped into the little French town of St. Mary-Grise the night before D-Day, it became the first town liberated. But it was a bit of an accident.
I landed in a cemetery back here. Then when I realized where I was, holy, I'm in the wrong place, because there's no cemetery down where we were supposed to land.
Howard Minoyan went home to America, but came back here to retire. There was a bond formed between St. Mary Glees and America in 1944 that has never been broken. No matter what Americans may do elsewhere, the people of this town will never forget what Americans did for them here. For Philip Jutras, the bond began when he boarded with the Castell family, Antoinette and Emile.
I think he landed just exactly where he was meant to be.
But he didn't know that yet. Jutras spent 20 more years in the Army, married, and had a family back in the States. But after his marriage fell apart, says his daughter Phyllis, he remembered the Castells.
He looked them up and found out Antoinette was a widow, and in 1972 he went over for good. And the rest is history.
For 32 years, he ran without pay the town's memorial to its liberators. Philip Jutras died here just 2 months ago.
I was looking for peace of mind and peace of soul, and I found it.
As has Howard Manoia.
I will be buried here if I die here in this country.
In the same graveyard you landed in?
That's right, because the town has given me a lot.
And a meaning to the lives and deaths of all the Americans who were here 60 years ago. Tom Fenton, CBS News, St. Mary Glees, France.
Even the youngest veterans of D-Day are now in their late 70s or early 80s. For many of them, this is the last major anniversary they'll see. And while they may pass from this earth, the legacy of the sacrifice they made on this ground will live on in every person who wakes to another day of freedom, lest we forget. And that's the CBS Evening News for this Sunday. From Normandy, I'm John Roberts. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, click on CBSNews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart, bringing your community jobs, low prices, and support for neighborhood programs.